Greg Kaye, a person from the past, but still alive and active. I'm supposed to read a script to you guys about the procedures today. All audience participants will be muted throughout the seminar. Please don't attempt to turn on your video or share your screen during the talk. There will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions live at the end of the talk, just like a normal seminar. Once the speaker has finished their talk, you can use Zoom's raise hand feature, lower left column area, to notify the meeting host that you'd like to ask the speaker a question. The raise hand feature is located underneath the participants tab at the top of the Zoom window. So that's it for the announcements. Now I must tell you that it's my pleasure to introduce today's seminar speaker, Melissa Mahoney. I've known Melissa for more decades than I would wish to remember, but I'm very proud of the time I've spent with her. She finished her bachelor's degree in environmental biology at the University of Colorado in Boulder in 1995, came to Moss Landing and finished her master's through San Francisco State University at Moss Landing Marine Laboratories. When she approached me, she originally wanted to be a sharkologist because she had spent a summer with Sonny Gruber at Bimini off Florida. And then she got here and we influenced her to study the age and growth and age validation of rockfishes because they were in the process of being overfished. So the topic she chose was age growth and radiometric age validation of the blackgill rockfish, Sebastes melanostomus, which was published in 2004. She's published several other papers since then, mainly on fisheries items and so on. Melissa, since Moss Landing, worked as a fisheries education person for the Monterey Bay youth while she was here at Friends of Moss Landing Marine Laboratories. She then worked for Seafood Watch, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, followed by a California Seagrad Extension program out of UC Santa Cruz as a research specialist. She then went to the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission and worked as a social scientist there from 2012 to 2013, and then joined the Nature Conservancy as the Sustainable Fisheries Project Director until 2017. Finally, and now, she's at the Environmental Defense Fund and is managing the Ocean Technology Solutions, and she's still there and very active. She's very involved in West Coast federal fisheries management policy and reforming it and advocating for it, advising and consulting stakeholders and partners. She co-founded the West Coast Nonprofit Seafood Trade Association, Positively Groundfish, led a multi-stakeholder coalition to successfully design and implement EM, which I had to look up, it's electronic management for the groundfish fishery on the West Coast, and co-created the Smart Boat Initiative to improve and modernize conservation and economic performance in fisheries. She's passionate about ocean conservation and is taking a leadership role, and I'm sure she'll tell you about that as the talk goes on. So it's my pleasure to introduce Melissa Mahoney and her talk, the age and growth of an MLML alumni, 20 years in and around the West Coast groundfish fishery. Take it away, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Greg. Boy, what an introduction. You kind of stole some of my thunder there that you're going to see in my talk, but I love that you told that story of me coming in and what I wanted to do and what I ended up doing were two different things. So thank you so much. And thank you to the seminar series and the hosts for this opportunity. It's so great to be with you all this afternoon. I can't say enough about my experience as a Moss Landing student. I can't quite believe either that it's been 20 years since I arrived in California at the trailers in Salinas. That was our school back in 1999. Seems like a long time ago. And I want to share with you today how my passion for fish and for the ocean has shaped the course of my life. looking back, I can't help but notice that growth rings, like the ones I studied back in the day at Moss Landing, are the perfect metaphor to tell this story. So let's just start with the basics here, in case some of you don't know what this is, or what I'm talking about with growth rings. This is a fish otolith. It's a Pacific cod otolith, to be exact. And otoliths are just the fancy word for a fish ear bone. And for fish, material is added, like minerals from the seawater are added and accreted over the life of the animal. And as you can see here in this picture, some of the rings are light and some of them are dark. Some of them are wide and thin, and that all has to do with the environmental conditions and the genetics of the species. But they get laid down and they are rarely very easy to interpret. But to a fisheries biologist, understanding the time period that is represented by these light and dark patterns is the gold mine for understanding life history of a species and how to manage its population well. Growth rings essentially represent a life lived. So for me, I just can't help but use these rings to think about how I've lived my life in the last 20 years through a series of defining moments, both internally and as I'm understanding the world around me. So I'll just start here in the middle of my imaginary otolith of me. And I'll start at the year 1999, because that's when I came to grad school. And it was also a time when biologists up and down the West Coast were discovering that rockfish stocks were plummeting, and that the life history and the population biology for many of the species in this genus Sebastes were just off. And as we all know now, thanks in part to the Age and Growth Lab at Moss Landing, we know that rockfish are long-lived and much slower growing than we had originally thought. Things got pretty bad for the Pacific Groundfish fishery right around 2000. The government declared a fishery disaster and the whole fishery was shut down, hitting the industry and coastal communities really hard. Of course, I wouldn't know about the repercussions of this for many years, because at that time, I really wanted to focus on a different animal. I wanted to study sharks. I mean, who wouldn't? As Greg said, I had just come off spending time in the Bahamas with this crazy guy, Dr. Sam Gruber, shown here on the left, with a tiger shark. And I was at this research station in Bimini where I got to catch and track and swim with all these beautiful creatures. Now, I just want to back up and say that probably since I was, I don't know, 10 or 12, I fell in love with sharks, and this was kind of my thing. And my brother, I just saw popped on, and he can attest to that. And also I want to say that one thing leads to another, and it was actually in Bimini where I met another Moss Landing student, Jean de Marignac, who told me about Moss Landing and the infamous Gregor Caillet. And so it was really through him and through this experience that I applied and eventually was accepted here. So I was pretty fired up to start sharks. And I remember those first several months in grad school, trying to talk to Greg and rustle up some projects around shark work. But as I just explained, the rockfish disaster was on the horizon, and all the funding was going towards studying rockfish age and growth. So you could say it was pretty much a practical choice when I let go of the sharks for 3 large boxes of black gill rockfish otoliths and a microscope. Now, I had a ton of fun going back through my albums and remembering my grad school years. So I found this photo of our ichthyology lab. And I think this was right after we toured the new building and we were about to move back in. We'd spent the whole first year going to Salinas every day to the trailers, except for the Friday afternoon seminars where we went down to the island and to that little room, and then we would have a campfire on the beach afterwards. That was pretty fun. But we were pretty excited to be back in this beautiful new building, of which I hope many of you are students in now, except for COVID and probably having to stay at home. But we really had a lot of fun here. And also dug up this picture of several of us somewhere down in Baja at a conference having a whole lot of fun together. And I want to give a special shout out to this guy here, Alan Andrews, who was my mentor in radiometric age validation and a dear friend, and still is. He would be on this call, but it's like 2 in the morning where he is. So Alan was also a grad student here in the 90s, and he got so good at aging fish that he went beyond the otoliths into establishing a radiometric aging lab here. And this photo is Alan and I presenting some early work on radiometric aging of the Gorgonian sea corals, which I don't think had ever been done at this point. And I actually amazingly found I still have this little coral. This is a cross section of it. So doing this project helped me prepare for my own thesis work, because as Greg and Kenneth and Alan can attest, I am no chemist. So that part was a little challenging. So the black-gill rockfish, boy, I got to know this animal very well. It pretty much took over my life for 2.5 years. I learned how to interpret its growth rings, thanks to a lot of help and support from other biologists and advisors. And I even still have this notebook. I also found this in my boxes, and this was basically my roadmap. I recorded everything I learned about the blackgill, all my observations, my discoveries, my mistakes. And on the right is a photo of the blackgill otolith cross-section from our published paper. This otolith was one of the best sections, and you can really see the banding pattern of light and dark, and you can see that this animal had a lot of years to live. So just a little more on my thesis before I move on. So there were 2 main parts to the work. The first was using those otoliths and the ages to establish a growth curve and estimate age for the different year classes. So that's what this figure is on the right, on the left. I'm sure if the ichthyology lab is still doing age and growth work, I'm sure that any of you have probably had to come up with a von Burton-Lantfy growth curve. The second part was to take the very core of the otolith, and I wish I had one to show you, but it's essentially the birthday material that gets laid down at the very beginning of the fish's life. And we used an alpha spectrometer to look at the radium to lead ratio. This is a naturally occurring decay series that the fish accretes radium into the otolith over time, and you can determine the age of that material using alpha spectrometry. So I'm not going to go too much more into that, but I just wanted to show you what I like to call the money shot. This graph on the right here shows the relative agreement between the otolith ages and the radiometric ages. So basically we did a pretty good job estimating the age on the otoliths, and then that radiometric age was able to validate what we found. And what we found was that this species reaches a maximum age of at least 90 years, probably more, and that females don't hit age at maturity until 15 or 20 years. So this is a really long-lived, slow-growing fish, and really the whole genus is kind of like this, especially the deeper living species. My thesis is probably still in the library, and we were able to publish a paper, so if you want to know more, go for it. So then fast forward 3 years, and it was all over. I defended my thesis, and we celebrated while the ink dried on the pages, and I have to say that feeling of accomplishment that night was just, wow, amazing. And then it was time for me to get a job and go out into the real world. So luckily for me, I had already had an internship at the Monterey Bay Aquarium at their growing seafood watch program. And I really like their approach for harnessing consumer power to move the industry towards sustainability. And I was offered a job there as an analyst. And I remember talking to Greg about this, and I remember very clearly him saying, you know, be careful with working for advocacy groups, because as a scientist, your reputation will be at risk. And I agree with that statement. Advocating and using science in that capacity can be risky, but I knew that that's why I came here, and that's what I always wanted to do, was use my skills to advocate on behalf of the oceans. So I took off and went to work at the Seafood Watch program. So in my first years there, because I had studied rockfish, of course I was tasked with researching the sustainability of the West Coast groundfish fishery for the Seafood Watch guide. And I'm imagine that all of you have seen this guide by now. This is the national edition, but there are some regional editions as well. And somehow I had made it all the way through my grad school career without actually talking to very many fishermen. And they were just right down the hill, as you know. So now I'm going to admit something to you, that back then when I was in school, I believed that they were the bad guys, that they needed to be managed with strict regulations and limits to protect the stocks and recover the damaged habitat. And yet during the course of my research here at Seafood Watch, I knew that I needed to see the whole picture of what the fishery was about. So I needed to talk to some fishermen. So it took quite a lot of courage and digging and networking, but I started to get the names of several fishermen working in the fishery, some locally and some elsewhere. A lot of them, when I told them who I was and who I worked for, they would go on a rant because there has been a lot of animosity between the aquarium and the local groundfish fleet. But if they could get past that and we could start having a conversation about the fishery, they would open up. And then something interesting started to happen in me. I became fascinated with their stories. I listened with my scientist mind to the words and their patterns of observation, their ideas. And then I realized that there was something bigger for me to understand here. It was really a defining moment or a growth ring. I started to drop my bias of them. I thought, wow, these are good people. They're smart people. They have deep knowledge of the resource that I had just spent years studying, mostly in a lab. They were also concerned with the health of the ocean, just like me, but they had a different stake in the matter, and they had a different way of talking about it. And so I thought, well, what if we could integrate fishermen's knowledge or local knowledge with all this science information, empirically derived information? Maybe we could have a better way of understanding the resource and how to manage it if we had both of those bodies of knowledge together. One fisherman in particular had a huge influence on me. His name was Joey Jones, and he ran the Lethal Weapon out of Moss Landing Harbor. Joey spent a lot of time answering my questions and telling me generously how he came to fish, who he had learned it from, how all the gear and the equipment work. He even took me fishing a couple times, let me go out on his boat, and just essentially let me pepper him with questions. And what came out of those conversations, and many others like it, was, well, a few things. Starting to answer that question that I had previously asked. Also was the time where I had come back to Moss Landing to the Friends, and it was through Joey and some other folks that we started the Fisheries Education Project. The program later moved to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and I'm so glad that it is still running. It is a chance for local youth, many of whom live within 50 miles of the ocean but never come to the ocean, a chance for them to connect with local fishermen and learn about the ocean and where their seafood comes from. And I really want to dedicate so much of my work and my path to Joey because he lost his life at sea in 2008. And I'm just so glad that his memory lives on in this work that we're doing. So more growth rings, more layers. I was beginning to notice that following my interests expanded my understanding of sustainability, which became about more than knowing about the natural system or about one species. It became about about this deeper understanding and collaboration with all the human actors who use that system and who care about that system. So one layer of experience or job or contract would lead to the next. And so I began to make a transition from what I thought I was going to be a fish biologist into the human dimensions realm. While working on that fisheries education project, I met Dr. Carrie Pomeroy of California Sea Grant, and the next few years would be an adventure of social science with her. Carrie took me under her wing and taught me about qualitative research, and it wasn't something that I was taught at Moss Landing back in the day. I don't know if it is now. So as I was finding my way in my career, the groundfish fishery was going through some major changes and challenges. A federal buyback program removed about a third of the effort from the fleet in order to reduce capacity. And then in 2003, a rockfish conservation area was established, creating a coast-wide closure all the way from the top of Washington all the way down through California. And that was to protect depleted rockfish stocks. There were 9 at the time, somewhere around 9 or 10 in those early 2000s that were declared overfished. And as you can see from the top right graph, the tonnage or the landings were basically cut by more than half between the 1990s and the 2000s. And thus the value of the fishery dropped as well. So managers and industry were having a really tough time trying to recover the fishery and to, in a way that the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which had been reauthorized in '97 and required rebuilding plans for all these overfished species, they were really having a tough time figuring out how to do that. So, but on my side, over the next few years, the work with Sea Grant and NOAA Fisheries connected me deeper into the fishing communities along our coast. I got to travel to lots of small port towns and harbors in the North Coast and Central Coast to interview fishery participants and business owners. The goal of our work was to understand how these communities have changed over time in response to resource abundance, availability, and socioeconomic and regulatory landscapes. So we basically we had all the fisheries landings data from everywhere, and we were pairing that with ethnographic or qualitative data to really interpret what was going on. The report on the left was published in advance of the Marine Protected Act designation process that happened on the North Coast. And this was one of the few published sources for socioeconomic data that helped inform that process. And for the report on the right, this was where I was a contracted social scientist, and I was assigned to the ports of San Francisco, Bodega Bay, and Half Moon Bay to actually go to those ports and conduct surveys that had been set up by the NOAA social science team, conduct surveys with fishery participants to assess how the newly implemented catch share system in the groundfish fishery was affecting communities. So I just used a term there, so we're going to explain it. I like this word cloud because it describes a lot of the key issues around the groundfish fishery. And I'm actually going to describe another term, groundfish. I I'm mostly assuming that everybody on this call knows what groundfish are, but just in case you don't, they are not ground up fish. They are all the species of fish that live on or near the bottom. So all the rockfish, the soles, the flatfish, sablefish. It's a complex of species that are together termed groundfish. So apologies for not defining that sooner if you were a little lost, but that's what groundfish means. So now let's talk about what catch shares mean. So in 2011, the trawl sector of the groundfish fishery, the ones with the big nets that drag them on or near the bottom, they moved from an individual fishing quota, or they moved to an individual fishing quota or catch share system. And this means that they no longer fished from a common pool where trip limits were set and a race to fish ensued with wasteful discards. Rather, each fisherman was given his or her own quota share based on their history of each of the main groundfish species. So you can think of it like a bank account for fish. Every pound of fish caught on the water, including the discards, had to come out of an individual's vessel account. And to make sure there was no cheating, this program required 100% monitoring of all fishing trips and all dockside landings. So there's a government contracted fisheries observer on every trawl trip since 2011. So essentially, this sector went from a derby style, high volume, lots of discard with very little accountability to a very risk averse, highly surgical fishery to avoid sensitive species, closed areas. Otherwise, there would be individual overages, which would tie up the boat until they could acquire the needed quota by leasing it from other fishermen. So it created a market within the fishery, essentially, for leasing quota. My social science research that I had done through Pacific States and NOAA had told me that a lot of people in the industry thought poorly of this new system. There were clearly winners and losers. A lot of people left the fishery, and there were a lot of, especially technology barriers for some of those that were older. But I kept moving along with the opportunity to see what else I could learn and how I could share what I'd learned doing this social science with other groups. So my next career move was into the NGO conservation policy realm. So when I joined the team at the Nature Conservancy of California in 2013, they were deeply engaged in the groundfish fishery. They had done something that no NGO had done before. They invested financially in the fishery. This is a timeline that I pulled off their website. It's just a great way to picture all that was going on there. So if you look in the middle, you can see in 2006, TNC purchased 13 groundfish permits from vessel owners from Morro Bay all the way up to Fort Bragg, California, in exchange for those fishermen to stop trawling and to agree to closing sensitive fish habitat, almost 4 million acres of it. And when the catch share system was implemented in 2011, TNC became the second largest quota shareholder in the whole fleet, just behind Pacific Seafoods, the largest processor. They had to use the quota or it would be redistributed. And in a few short years, they would have to divest much of the quota to get underneath the caps that were established a couple years after this program was implemented. So part of my job, and why I made that circle there, was that part of my job was to help communities develop local quota funds that could securely hold fishing privileges for that region's fishing community. And TNC would be able to then divest their quota into these funds. Since I live in the Monterey Bay region, I was charged with bringing this idea to life here. Together with these co-founders from the city of Monterey, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and others, we founded the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust back in 2014. The Trust mission is to advance the social, economic, and environmental sustainability of all our bay's fisheries. And in the last 5 years, the Trust has held almost $2 million worth of groundfish quota, and we've leased over 600,000 pounds at a discount to local and California-based fishermen. In the last 2 years, we started this Get Hooked Seafood Initiative, helping to rebuild local markets. And the Trust also has a monthly bulletin on management meetings and also a leadership program to support fishermen in having a stronger voice in the management process. So then change came again, as it does. Another ring got laid down, and I moved over to the Environmental Defense Fund, who is another big player in shaping groundfish policy reform on the West Coast. My role here, I grabbed this symbol actually off that poster that is in the background there on the top right, was a poster that I put together for a conference a couple years ago, and it just in a very simplistic terms describes kind of all the things that we do on our oceans team here at EDF. And my role in the last several years has been to lead and support our policy efforts at the federal level. And that means that I have attended a lot of council meetings. What is a council meeting, you might ask? So this is a picture of a meeting of the Pacific Fishery Management Council. And this is how our federal fisheries are managed. I'm not going to go too deep here, but just a very short primer. This is one of 8 regional councils in the US, and it's made up of representatives from the states of California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Yes, Idaho, because the salmon go all the way up there and all the way back to the ocean. So the council, through its advisory panels and through public comment, have the very challenging task of carrying out the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which governs all of our fisheries. They make recommendations for how groundfish and the other fisheries they manage should be managed. And then NOAA Fisheries carries that out most of the time. Sometimes they disprove. It was this body that designed the catch share system that was implemented in 2011, that designated closed areas and monitoring requirements and catch limits, all with a hefty amount of scientific and public input. And really, I just want to say, like, this is a system in and of itself. It took me a year or two of just going and observing without saying a thing, but just asking a lot of questions on the side to sort of figure out how the sausage is made here. And I make a joke, but I really do have so much respect for this group and their process. It is kind of messy, but it's very it's a democracy. It's a democratic process, and anyone can come and give comment and join. And the advisory panels are really well run, and it's an honor to be part of it at this point. Lastly, I just want to put an arrow here to show this is kind of the hot seat. So this is where you come and sit if you're representing an organization or yourself and you want to come and give public comment. And through this process, again, I recognize the importance of understanding people. What makes people tick? What motivates them? How to strategize? How to speak to allies and enemies alike? Because really, in the end, as my former boss, Carrie, put it, we are not managing fish, we're managing people. And it took me a lot of years to want to study people, but that's really pretty much what I do now. So with EDF, in our Ocean Technology Solutions group now, one major area of effort that I'm leading is around making that 100% accountability requirement in the groundfish fishery more cost effective. So for years, the only option was to carry a human observer, and this costs upwards of $600 a day, which continues to dampen the profitability of the trawl fishery. So we have worked together with industry, with the council, with the agencies to develop electronic monitoring applications, or EM applications. So this process started many, many years ago at the council, and within the next year or two, we should see a fully implemented and regulated EM program in this fishery. So it has been a long time coming, and it's been very challenging on a number of levels, but it's really exciting to see it getting closer and closer. I had to throw this in. Sometimes I even get a special assistant in my job. This is my son, Nash. And one day last year, he came with me to help replace a camera on a vessel. I let him climb up there because he told me that he could do it. And probably wasn't my best parenting day, but it was probably one of the funnest that we had together. So coming up into these last couple of years, and the fisheries conservation performance has vastly improved over the last several years, much faster than stock assessment scientists predicted. And partially this is due to all the management reform, which reduced fishing mortality, reduced wasteful discards, and really created a level playing field through everyone being held accountable for their catch. It may have also had to do with stock assessment science and models are always changing, and that means the results are always changing. So that's another part of the story, but just to add that in. And it's by no means perfect, but we're still working on it. We're working on revitalizing the market, and working on some other, the EM situation, and streamlining regulations and some other odds and ends. One more really great moment in the fishery was when just in January of this year, NOAA Fisheries came out with new essential fish habitat and rockfish conservation area designations, which protect about 13,000 square miles of sensitive habitat. But at the same time, it opens up about 3,000 square miles that had been closed to bottom trawling. And this all happened over the course of, again, probably the last 7 or 8 years through the council process, when a lot of people came together and pored over maps and shared ideas, with the fishermen sharing what areas they thought were sensitive, the NGOs sharing that as well, and the fishermen saying what areas they wanted to have back that they thought they could trawl, where the bottom habitat was flat and not as sensitive. So this really, in a moment, was, in essence, was the fishermen's knowledge coming together with a lot of scientific knowledge. And most fishermen will tell you that if managers ever close an area, it's never going to reopen. But this proves that with collaboration and with integrating these two bodies of knowledge, it is possible to improve how we manage our fishery and make it a win-win solution for protecting habitat and also improving the economic performance of the fishery. This is another super fun project. A couple years ago, we, EDF and another NGO, the Marine Stewardship Council, and some harvesters and processors, we formed a nonprofit trade association called Positively Groundfish. I'm on the board, and it has been one of the most fun and rewarding experiences watching this little association grow, and watching, we have some of the largest processors in the room, we have fishermen in the room, and we're all trying to figure out how to raise all boats, how to revitalize the groundfish market to create more demand and hopefully more supply. In 2019, we got a pretty big federal grant to do market research, and we hired a director. She came to us with just an amazing background in business and marketing, not to mention a huge passion for the oceans. And she whipped up this roadshow and a traveling kitchen exhibit, exhibition booth, and I got to attend some of the shows in the West, and it's been so amazing and fun to see people sampling rockfish and sole and thinking that they're delicious and saying, "What? Where do these come from? Oh, they're sustainable. They're MSC certified. They're Seafood Watch Best Choice. Oh my gosh! Where can I get my hands on this stuff?" So this is also part of balancing that equation, where we wanted to see the conservation performance improve in the fishery, but the economic performance is really what makes it last. It's really what has fishermen say, okay, this is working, let's keep doing it this way. So it's been really wonderful to see this program come together and see the response of the public. And we just got another grant. We're going to be doing more awesome stuff this next year with seafood health and nutrition. One more super fun project that again has been really the culmination of that question that I posed to myself so long ago when I was doing the fisherman interviews. I co-produced a film that puts the stories of fishermen to life, brings it to life on the screen. And I wanted to see if I could share just play the trailer with you, because it says more gracefully than I could just what the movie is up to. So I am going to, hang on. Okay, hopefully this works.
Being alone out in the ocean is no problem. I've been doing this for 50-some years. To be able to handle fishing is to be able to be out there with just you and your crew and your boat somewhere where, there's no one around to either help or hinder what you're doing. I was always, from a little kid, fascinated with fishing. I'm always amazed at what we can pull out of the ocean sometimes.
Fishing is so restricted that there is a lot less seafood that is coming off of these docks. There are a lot less fishermen these days that can afford to actually fish because of the closures. And you're seeing kind of people like myself and Scott and a lot of the other younger fishermen that have kind of adapted to that.
So my hope for the future is that we can leverage technology to increase the efficiencies and streamline the supply chain so that people can buy directly from the fishermen, which currently is almost impossible unless you live right next to a major pier or harbor.
On a Wednesday, we'll call fishermen up and see what they're catching. We process it on Mondays, and then it goes out for distribution. In a world that's speeding up, the thing that I think we should all be really cautious of, and the thing that we should be paying more attention to, is the time that we have with our food. So it's not just about a piece of protein on your plate, but it's about where this fish is coming from and the individuals that brought it to you.
There's something romantic about this last source of food that we get from the wild. Our generation has the opportunity to either see the end of commercial fishing for the first time in history, or make sure that there's plenty of fish in the sea for generations to come.
Okay, I hope that you could all hear that and see that. And actually, just watching that, what comes up for me is Martin Reed saying that it's so hard to buy directly from fishermen. And when we filmed that back in, I don't know, 2015, probably, there were very few ways to get fish direct from fishermen. And now there are a lot more models, there are a lot more businesses that are doing that. The movie highlighted Real Good Fish. That's one of the local businesses actually operating right out of Moss Landing that is doing just that. So I hope you get a chance to see the whole film at some point. It's about 80 minutes long. And to me, it again speaks to my current thesis, which is, how are we in relationship to each other, to this beautiful, precious planet, and to ourselves? Because every choice that we make has an impact. And I will go back a few more layers now and just say that my relationship with the ocean started really early. And it was unusual in that I grew up in Colorado, but every chance I got to stand near or play in the ocean, I loved it. The ocean is still a constant reminder to me of beauty, of change, and of the shared interdependence that connects all of us. And so I've shared with you many layers of my own growth rings. I hope that you learned something more about the groundfish fishery, but more so, I hope that I've inspired you to think about your own defining moments, your own growth rings, and what they mean to you. It's relatively easy for us as scientists to use the fish ear bone and its rings to interpret that creature's life story. But for us humans, we have to tell our stories to each other as a way to connect with our own deeper purpose and with each other. So for me, these growth rings, these defining moments are how I get to connect with my humanity, that I'm a human being with a body and a soul that wants to evolve. And I would say that right now on this planet, with all that's going on, I think the signs are that we are being asked to evolve, and rather quickly. Just lastly, I just want to say that I'm so grateful for all the blessings in my life. I recognize the privilege that I have had to go to college and to go to grad school and study the things that I wanted to do, and go along with the ups and downs of my life. And I really hope that you get to do the things that you want to do and lean into your growing edges and build out new patterns of being. I hope that as you do this, that you'll follow your heart and not just your mind. And in 20 years, I bet that you will have an even greater story to tell. So with that, here are my thank yous. Of course, thanking my former advisory committee. And I'm just so grateful, Greg and Kenneth. I think well, I know Greg is on the line. I think I saw Kenneth. So many more things I could say and fun memories to share. Thankful to all these other folks, especially to the fishermen who let me into their lives and taught me so much about fisheries. And finally, to my little boy here, who is truly my greatest teacher. So with that, I'll open it up to questions and comments. Thanks.
I'm not sure what my role is. Am I on? Because I don't see questions.
I think folks are gonna put them in the
Chat room.
Well, it's tempting to put them in the chat, but I think what's being asked is to raise hand.
Yeah, if you click on the participants button at the bottom, and then in there for everyone is a raised hand button.
So do you control this, Red, or do I?
We'll take care of it, Greg. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Seems like people are a little too shy for questions today. Oh, there we go.
Here's a couple. June Stress, yeah. Amanda.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hi. That
Hi,
was
Jan.
really great. Oh, I'm never too shy to ask questions. Melissa, that was such a great presentation. You know, that 60 minutes or whatever it was really flew by. I really appreciate that you showed all the different, projects you've been involved in and the video, and kind of really offering us Moss Landing Marine Lab students a view into a solely academia career path, and like all of the different directions that can take. It was a really great presentation. I hope you can come back and do it every year. And actually, I think I remember you came and talk at the seminar for the fisheries class in 2015, maybe. Anyway, so it's great to kind of follow along. So I do have a question. I was wondering, you mentioned that you had connected with that social scientist, Carrie, to create that Pacific States Fisheries report. So that's definitely one dimension of my work for maybe for the future that I've been thinking about learning more about and wanting to incorporate, continuing on with the natural sciences research. So I was wondering kind of how you really made that transition and that jump, connecting with Carrie, but also for your own work. Like, do you feel like to do that, you would need to have the professional academic background for it, or is that something you can just kind of start connecting with other people and learning about yourself?
Great question. Couple things come up. I mean, interestingly, I think when I was at Moss and sort of going into my career, there was really very little focus on social science. So there were a couple of like token social scientists and economists at NOAA and at various places, but people were really focused on the biology and on, understanding the system. And so for me, I kind of just stumbled my way there because I kind of followed where my energy was going. And, what I didn't share in that time was I left Seafood Watch, and I actually took kind of a mini sabbatical with my husband at the time. We just left because of some things that happened, and we went traveling. And then I came back, and it was really hard to get work, just for whatever reason. And so I just took whatever came. Like I got a job at Friends of Moss Landing, and it was really fun. And I started talking to fishermen, and then it was through that work that I met Carrie, and I also met an economist named Cindy Thompson, and Cindy was part of that work as well. So, I just met them, and we worked together on that. And then just as it happened, they got a grant to do that North Coast Fishing Communities profile, and I interviewed for that. I also interviewed at that same time for a job with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I almost took that job, and I'm so glad that I took the job with Sea Grant. It was just more my thing. And I often thought about, well, gosh, I'm in this whole new realm of social science, and I don't know what I'm doing, and maybe I should go back to school. But I was doing it on the job, and Carrie and Cindy were teaching me how to do it. So I just jumped in and did it. And that's, kind of like the those few years between like 2006 and 2013, when I got the job at the Nature Conservancy, was an absolute patchwork of consulting and contracts and grant funded work. And then I had a baby in there, and like all kinds of things happened. And I just kind of put one foot in front of the next, and did the best I could do. And I kind of just stumbled into it. But you know, that's what I was trying to get across, is that 20 years ago, I thought my career was gonna look totally different. And that's just kind of life, you know, life happens. And so whatever you're planning now, it's really good to have a compass, but then you just step in, and life's going to take you places, and then it's going to take you to the next place. And so I applaud you for your interest in that, because it's really about people at this point. You know, we need to make different choices. So we need to understand how to influence people and their choices. And it starts with us.
Great. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks for the question.
Hi, Melissa. I'm not sure if this is a question or if this is going to be more of a jumping off for happy hour conversation. I'm Amanda. I'm up here in the corner. You said something in the middle of your talk, just a little sentence of, at the time that you were working, I think for Seafood Watch, you felt that the fishermen were the bad guys, and that has changed. And I see this too as kind of like, as you move more into a field, you get the black and white goes away, and you get the grayscale picture, and then the full color view of everything that's going on. So thinking about how to have the strongest effect, I really like this, because with Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust and kind of connecting directly with the fishermen, it seems like you're taking out some of the I don't know what to call it, giving people what they want and need, which is, you know, access to fish that are harvested sustainably and locally, and making that available in kind of the best way possible. Has that been kind of a guiding principle, or how did you kind of make that switch? And what are your perceptions now of, I don't want to say who are the bad guys. I don't think there are bad guys, but I mean, what are kind of the guiding things in how you decide who's listed or who's part of the trust and things like that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I generally try and stay away from good and bad at this point. So yeah, it was, you know, it's an easy way to, you know, when you see somebody saying or doing something that seems completely counter to what is rational and kind and, you know, thoughtful, it's really easy to be like, that's a bad guy. And it's so much in our culture, but it really, you know, I do still, you know, I don't just automatically love every fisherman I encounter at this point. Like I try and take people, every person as it comes. Like I have NGO colleagues that I argue with all the time, and I totally respect their opinion. I have fishermen colleagues that I don't agree with, but we agree to work together on certain things. So going to the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust, there was actually a lot of tension and animosity when we were trying to develop the trust. The fishermen were excited that we were bringing quota back into the community, and they felt a sense of ownership over that, especially some people in particular whose permits had been in their family, and that quota that was coming back. And but there had been a deep rift that happened between the aquarium and the fishing industry, and it was over, you know, Seafood Watch and the rockfish getting put on the avoid list and a whole bunch of other things. So there was a lot of like good and bad. You're bad, and this is, you know, what you did was wrong. And what was so heartening to see over the last few years is that as we kind of chipped away and built the organization and created a very principled structure for how we're going to operate. We're going to operate based on conservation principles. We want to see the fishery recover, but we want to promote its sustainable recovery and sustainable growth. And over time, like as we had meetings and we created advisors, we had fishermen, we still have fishermen advisors, like this rift has been kind of healed more. And so I think, you know, blow-ups can happen, you know, different sectors of the fishery are, even currently there's 2 sectors of the fishery now that things have just kind of blown up in another way. And so there's always kind of something going on. But it's less about good guys and bad guys. And it's more just about like, well, what do you want? You know, and I think most of the time when you ask people that, well, what is it you really want? You find that people generally want the same thing. They want clean water and fresh air and food on the table for their families. And, you know, like we want the same thing. So if you can get to that place and then say, okay, how do we go from here? Let's figure it out. I don't know if that helped or if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's great.
I don't see any more questions. So is it appropriate for me to thank the speaker? And if so, I will be happy to do so. Melissa, that was a fascinating talk. And I have one question that might be a good one to end with. Are your growth zones narrower now or broader?
Wow, that is a great question, Greg.
Normally, as one ages, their growth zones get smaller and smaller, thinner and thinner. Sounds
Yeah.
like you're going the other way.
Yeah, I think maybe they are. I am feeling well resourced, and also for fish, you know, the growth bands are very narrow if it's been like a really cold winter or they didn't get enough food, and so, you know, you have really weak, thin growth bands. And I feel like as I go through my life, and it is such a blessing that I feel like my growth rings have gotten bigger and richer and more colorful. And, you know, even when, you know, things are not going too well on the outside, I have practices that help me stay grounded and resourced on the inside. So yeah, actually I would say my growth bands are pretty thick and colorful at this point. Thank you. That's a great question.
I thought it would be a good way to end your talk, which did show how you evolved over your life. And it teaches Moss Landing students now and faculty just where some of our graduates can go and do wonderful things. Thank you.
Thank you all. So great to be with you.